Okay, my people, welcome to the second day of this first edition of the BEHR Virtual Summit. Yesterday, my gosh, was an incredible day. Many gold nuggets to take away and to be applied. But today's lineup is outstanding too. Today, we are going to open the session with probably the special one speaker. Uh, he's the director of membership at CIPP. She is one of the most influential speakers and commentators in the UK. He's a writer. His areas of expertise are organizational development, culture, learning and development, corporate ethics, employee engagement, and of course, future of work. David, delighted to have you here. Welcome. How are you?
I'm really excited to be here. Really excited, and the platform's brilliant. The rest of the speakers are brilliant. I'm genuinely delighted.
Thank you, and I can imagine a better start today having you. Thank you for being here because I know you are in so demand. You are so busy. Thank you for being here. Let's enjoy your talk, please, David.
Hello. So, welcome to day two. I am genuinely delighted to be here. I had a slight mishap. I just wore my Bluetooth earphones to the toilet. And was very concerned that everyone would be able to hear that. That isn't a situation I would have got into a year ago, which potentially is a wonderfully descriptive way of saying that everything in the world has changed in a really short amount of time. So I am not going to give you a polished speech. I'm not going to give you really any models or any wonderful constructs of thinking about the world, because you have a whole day ahead of you of, I'm sure, incredibly polished and informative and well thought through presentations. I want to talk to you for 40 minutes about what's happening in the world currently, about where we might be going next, about why it's very important not to listen to anyone who confidently says where we're going next, and potentially share some things that just provoke your thoughts as you get the rest of this rich content through the next few days. It's a really difficult time to be alive. And whilst this may be, I hope, a joyous event, it's against a hugely tragic backdrop. And one of the things that we need to work out is, what do we want to come from this? It's a public health crisis, like most of us will have never known. And the challenge that we have is, to what extent do we have control and agency over what happens next? And I'm delighted that this event is taking place, because if you ask me to name the three things that I love most in the world, beyond family and loved ones, it would probably be HR, behavioral economics, and hot dogs. And despite the fact that there are no hot dogs available in a virtual environment, the first two things are really important. And more importantly, I want to talk about, before we get into what does the future look like, why actually there are two things that are really important in that future. Understanding how human beings work, what they do, who they really are, how they respond, how they consider incentives, and the science that sits behind that guides our insight, is hugely important. It's very difficult, I think, to be a good HR practitioner and not understand how people work. And yet, seemingly, lots of people attempt to carry away or carry out that combination of things. I've seen HR professionals that genuinely are just puzzled with the way that people are in real life. And as we now have our home environments at times completely being absorbed by our work environments and vice versa, and all of the confusion that goes with that, now is a really good time for us to understand that being experts in people, how they make decisions, how they operate as groups, how they weigh up different things, is absolutely key. I first got into or found a passion for behavioral economics way back with probably the original Freakonomics book, because I was wrestling at a time early in my career with the perennial HR problem, as it was before things became more automated, which is, how do you get people to return their performance review paperwork? And I was surrounded by a group of people who were just going, I don't understand why they don't do it, because we tell them to do it. And what we'd fundamentally failed to do was understand everything else going on in the world for those people, understand how they prioritize, understand the incentives to do that, And Freakonomics was a wonderful way of me understanding that we're not rational human beings. We don't weigh things up rationally. We don't often win through logic. Feelings come into play. The way that we think about the world isn't rational in the way that the economics textbooks that I would have read when I was growing up suggest. And if you can take a bundle of the social sciences and turn them into genuine insights into how people are going to be or react in different situations, the advantage that gives you as an HR practitioner is exponential, absolutely exponential. And my fascination with it has grown through the years, and that has bridged actually a time of it being hugely popular through to some of the challenges around the replication crisis. And what research can we really trust and what does it say? And today I'm going to talk a little bit then about the future of work and a bit about that and kind of bring it home. And there'll be some book recommendations at the end. So if you manage to sit through 40 minutes and you've taken nothing from it, I can guarantee at the very least you'll get some good book recommendations to kind of finish up with. But before we start, I wanted to kind of give you a kind of a backseat view of how this feels at the moment. So I'm supposed to, because I've had media training, I'm supposed to focus here the entire time for 40 minutes. And I'm supposed to do that because staring in one place apparently makes me seem more authentic. I find that difficult to believe. So I'm probably going to speak to you as a human being would for the next kind of 35 minutes or so from here. But I also want to speak quite humbly. And it's possible to be humble and confident. We see those two things sometimes as a strange kind of continuum, that you can't be one and the other. But I am confident that lots of the people that are telling you how things are going to be in years to come don't know what they're talking about, or aren't open to the fact that they may be wrong. And the reason I'm saying that is because I've been doing things similar to this for a number of years. And if you went back 10 years, everyone was very confident that the robots would have taken over and would all be working from the beach. Neither of those things has really happened. But what we have seen recently is a huge shift in many countries to working from home, and for technology to enable that. And that brings a whole raft of different problems, a whole raft of different conflicts, and a whole raft of different things where insight into how people are, how they work, how they come together, how they share information, what we trade, how we understand each other as people. It's never been as important as it is now. I've had some conversations with my teams recently just to say, I don't know how to do this. Just to be really open and say, look, I've never led purely in this way. I've never led against a backdrop that's like this for people in their own lives or the way they have to go about their daily lives. Given that, I need to be humble enough to step back and say, I need other people's help. I need help from my network. I need help from smart people. I need to understand actually what's been done before. And that's where you get that blend of art of what we're doing and the science of what we're doing. And it's really important. And I'll talk as we go through it a bit more about evidence-based HR and some of the techniques that we need to apply from that. How we need to think actually about what's a case study versus what's actual research, and how we are drawn to things that are new and shiny and exciting. But that's not necessarily what we need at a time where there may be enduring truths that actually, whilst they may seem less sexy, might actually be more pertinent or more useful. So I'm going to give you the abridged version initially of the talk that I would have given 5 years ago. And you can see how out of date it is. So I would have said, look, there are two possible scenarios with the implications of artificial intelligence. One of which is that we move to a kind of Star Trek scenario. And within that, we are free to explore. We are free to spend more time with our families, and the quality of our lives improves as the amount of working hours that we need to do declines. And we use technology to enable us to do that and to augment us in the way that we do. The other kind of full opposite is the Terminator scenario, where all of the robots rise up and kill us. In that case, it doesn't really matter about anything else, and certainly you could regret having sat through me giving this, because your lives on Earth are short. But in between those two, it's a slightly more dystopian future, which is that large corporations make use of technology to displace the need for people, and the social and economic implications of that are dire. And you end up with an entirely fragmented world where there are some people that have profited from that and the majority of people haven't. And our job as a society is to weigh up which of those futures we want. But whichever future comes, there will be a bridging period where the economy needs to fundamentally recalibrate. And within that recalibration, we need to make sure that we have some agency. So that's what I would have probably said a few years ago. And then I would have given you some witty examples and stories to try and bring some things to life. But that would have been the nub of it. And then COVID happened. And what happened is that the cycles of change that we might have described happening over a 5 to 10 year period suddenly accelerated, and some of our assumptions around the world and how it would operate fundamentally changed. So I'm based in the UK. If you'd have seen me on stage 5 years ago, I would have talked about how technology will enable us to hire anyone from across the globe, and you'd move to a borderless economy over time. And that seemed to be the nature of shift. Since then, what we've had is Brexit in the UK. So the intended separation, certainly economically, of the UK from the rest of Europe. And you've also had the Trump presidency, which has been very focused on America as a singular entity and protecting its interests rather than that globalization angle. Then what's happened is COVID. And with everyone working from home, there are now questions about, well, why couldn't I hire anyone to do something through technology? If it's delivered through this format, if we don't need to be physically present, why wouldn't that be something that would cause an economic shift again? And the fact is, there are so many complexities in terms of what we're looking at that it will impact different sectors, different countries, different people, different ages, different demographics in different ways. And the challenge that we have then is to make sure that we don't reflect the mistakes of the past in terms of inequity, in terms of unfairness, in terms of poor quality of work, and just replicate that in the future. So whether that's disparity in male and female pay, whether that is racism in the workplace, whether it's a lack of voice, a lack of fairness, those are problems to be solved. But there's a challenge in getting organizations to focus on solving those problems at a time when many of them are just focused on survival. And so what seemed, if you like, a slow progress towards a different world of work has now become an accelerated crunch of activity and decision-making and challenges in a really short time. And one of the things that we know from behavioral economics, clearly, is that if you want to improve the clarity of someone's decision-making, putting extra pressure on them does not help. You tend to get what would be called functional fixedness. So we would solve problems in the way that we traditionally have done, and we've thought about the components in the way we traditionally have done. Whereas the problem that we face now is that everything's up in the air. How does it come down? And if you don't want it to come down in the way that it did before, if our question isn't how do we go back to where we were before, but our question is how do we best go forward from this point, then that's an almighty challenge to face into. And the only way that I think you solve that challenge is through community, through sharing of intelligence, through challenge, through use of networks in a way that isn't about selling, isn't about just generating relationships, but it's generating the capability to be more creative, generating the capability to get more challenge within a network, or a richness of thinking, or a gracefulness of thought that isn't possible when we are on our own, under pressure, and feeling isolated. So there are 3 key things that we ask at the CIPD for our members to be. And I'll come back to them at the end, but we ask for them to be more evidence-based, and I'll talk about that in a bit of detail, more principles-led, and I'll talk about that in a bit more detail, but also outcomes-driven. And those 3 things for me actually are at the heart of what we do next in the world of work. How can we be more principles-led and have organizations that stand for something other than just market forces? How can we focus not just on GDP, but the consequences of generation of GDP and the equality of distribution that sits within that? Because we know that markets are very good for moving money from one place to another efficiently. What they're not very good for is genuinely solving for happiness or well-being or any of the things that we might actually count and matter to us as human beings. And there's a famous Bobby Kennedy speech that talks about the deficit of GDP thinking, but we're well over half a decade away from that speech, and we still haven't made that advance in terms of the richness of our thinking about what we really need and what we're solving for. So organizations that are principles based, that think about actually their obligations rather than just their opportunities, are absolutely key going forward. But the other things that we ask to be matter as much. So evidence-based, and that is where, for me, thinking about people and the research that has been done and what we understand from different stakeholder groups and what we can know and what we cannot know is hugely, hugely important. Because now is a time for learning, now is a time for testing, now is a time for experimentation. And when we talk about being evidence-based, it shouldn't be a limiting factor. It shouldn't be that you need concrete science, because science doesn't work like that. And anyone listening to this, I'm guessing, unless this is your first time in this environment, will know there are no hard and fast answers, and that things vary by context, things vary by time. Lots of research is done in one particular sector, but experimenting and seeing from what other people have learned, does this hold true here? That's a skill that we need to pick up as HR practitioners. That testing and experimentation cycle, and the humility and humbleness to be wrong. To just go, we tried that and it didn't work. And not in the way that you hear when you join an organization, which is never try that again, but we've tested this and we've learned a bit from it. But actually, that's not going to be the thing that fixes it. And the challenge that we have in this enforced way of working, either from home or remotely, or in a way that's different, is that we need to unlearn some of the things we have only recently learned. So for many organizations, we shifted from a traditional way of working that had been embedded for years to needing to work remotely. And we're just delighted that we've been able to do that. But what we haven't then done is taken the shift to go, look, is this the way it should work? Or is this just a poor facsimile of what we had prior? Are we defaulting to the way that we work being dictated by what was prior rather than how we best solve for the problem in front of us? And then the other area that we talk about is being outcomes driven. And that is far more important than ever. So what's interesting is that for our research, so this would apply to the UK, we have surveyed 1,000 employers, and the majority of those employers say that people can work and have been working as or more effectively, more productively from home. And that is a shock because people didn't expect that. But if we can focus in on what people contribute, the difference that people make, then actually that is far more effective than working out how long they've stayed in a chair. Because you never hire someone, normally, possibly with the exception of security guards, to primarily sit in one place for a day. That's never the challenge. You never go, that person's got a bright spark in their eye and they've scored brilliantly on the testing we put them through. But most brilliantly, they managed to sit still for the interview process. We hire people for their capabilities. We shouldn't then assess them on their presence. We should assess them on their outputs. And if we can get more nuanced in that space, and actually if we can start understanding the multiplier effect that good people in organizations can have on others, the ability to bring the best out of others, and start understanding that, then we can have a different framework for the way that we think about talent and performance in organizations. So I'm not going to confidently tell you anything that's going to happen next, but there are some key questions about what might happen next. I know that you've got a session coming up later on location. And at the heart of it is, where is work best done, and avoiding creating universal rules. So it can't be a lazy, should everyone be in the office? Should everyone not be in the office? It needs to be understanding actually how that plays out for a host of different people in a host of different scenarios, doing different work types at different times. It needs to be about working smarter, not just about where work is done geographically, and not a binary answer to that very complex question. And what I've seen already is a lack of nuance in the thinking in that space. And how that manifests is people saying, for instance, well, 80% of our team are okay working from home, so that's working. What are the implications for inclusion and productivity of that 20%? How would you enable that? What are the different challenges there? How is this a different environment for someone entering the workplace for the first time? How will you support their career? How are they going to learn? These are the questions that there probably won't be universal answers to, but we need to search the answers to within organizations. And if we don't do that, then it's going to be a hugely challenging time for organizations in terms of how they perform. But there will be a net drag from this period if we are complacent that far outlasts the period it needs to be. There will undoubtedly be horrific economic consequences of what's happening now. Our challenge, the only one at hand really, is how do we look after people, nurture people, support people well enough to get the best possible results for them and organizations, to make sure that we come out of this as quickly as we can, as successfully as we can, and then sustain those more positive ways of working. So there's a question about where we do work. There's a very important question about how we do work. Has that fundamentally shifted? Is leadership still the same in a scenario like this? Is management or organizational structure still the same? Is now the time that more organizations need to think about agile working and bringing teams together and bringing them apart more successfully in different structures? What does this mean for different sectors? What does it mean for hospitality? What does it mean for retail? Are there lessons that different sectors can learn from other sectors? Can we share talent in different ways? Do we restructure the working week? Because it shouldn't be centered around a working week that was created, primarily for factory environments. It should be centered around the research that we know around how people are productive now, or how they could be more productive. And then you've got questions that are possibly even more profound, which are why we work and who do we work for. And we've seen in the UK in particular, but we've also seen it in Germany, France, other countries, the state taking more of a role in looking after people through this period, but also taking on some of the responsibilities traditionally of the employer. People's expectations have changed. In the US, obviously, the role of the government there is hotly disputed at times, and what happens at different levels in different ways. But how we care for each other as a society has to be one of the core questions that we ask. And what are the manifest differences that you might want to expect from business or responsible businesses on the far side of this are also absolutely key. And we've seen that not only through COVID, but actually we've seen that through Black Lives Matter. We've seen that through an increased focus on race in workplaces and the implications of that. Do we want organizations to be purely profit-seeking, or do we want them to be purposeful? And what do we mean by that? Do we mean that they've got something good that they can put in the annual report each year, that it seems the work they're doing is noble, that they donate to good causes, but they still do bad things in the background? Or are we holding organizations to a higher standard on the far side of this? And I would hope that it's the latter. I would hope that we get more organizations that are positive, that the difference they can make in the world isn't just to a bottom line, but is to the communities that they operate in, to the people that come and work for them, and to the people that consume those products as well. And I don't think that's idealistic. I think that is possible. I think with the changes that we're going through now, we have a possibility that's generational to rethink the way we do some of these things, because they just weren't working before. Workplaces aren't fair, they're not transparent, they quite often are horrible places for human beings to exist. And if we, through these tragic events, have an opportunity to reshape that, we absolutely should be doing that. So the interplay between all of those different factors in different segments during a global recession is the reason that I'm saying, if anyone tells you they confidently know how things are going to look in 5 years' time, they must be lying, because nobody knew how it was going to look 6 months ago, or they were guessing, and maybe some people got that guess right. Nobody knows how it's going to look in 6 months' time. So all you're looking for is the nubs of those emergent ideas, those concepts that actually we would like to hold on to. And then it's about puzzling together as to how we do that. So I've got enough time to kind of go into those concepts of evidence-based, principles-led and outcomes-driven in a bit more detail, and to get in some slide references to some excellent behavioral economics texts. But now is the time for you to start, if you fundamentally disagree with me on any of this, to start firing up the questions and thinking about how they may look. And if you fundamentally agree with me, start thinking about how you might frame some of those things as questions. But We talk about being more evidence-based. And the way that I describe that is sort of really bad joke. So imagine that you are walking down the road and you see someone sprinkling white powder in the road. And you go up to that person and you say, "Excuse me, what are you doing?" And they say, "I'm sprinkling elephant powder." And you say, "Well, what's elephant powder?" And they say, "It keeps elephants away." And you say, "But there aren't any elephants around here." And they say, "Yes, it's brilliant powder." HR departments across the world specialize in elephant powder at times. We don't look at the science. We don't look at the research. We don't look at, quite often, anything apart from whichever company is getting featured in a magazine of our choice or on a website as a case study. What we do is we assume there is a causal relationship between the activity we do and some output in an organization. The organization succeeding, we launched that thing last year. Therefore, the thing that we launched last year must be a good thing. And now is the time for us to have a crusade to eliminate elephant powder in organizations. Now is the time when we are so busy and under pressure and organizations are struggling so much that the extraneous work that adds no value must be something that we attempt to stamp out. Because we need time for creativity. We need time to work out the right solution to complex problems. We need time to experiment. And that means being beholden to all of the mechanics that we had before that may or may not add value is a really bad starting point. If we get the chance to start from scratch, if we stop doing the things that quite often we get patted on the head for because they feel like the sort of things HR should be doing, then we have an ability to play a key, important role in reshaping where we go next. Not because we should be patronizing or judging businesses, but because we should be enabling businesses to thrive. And if we've got practices that we haven't examined deeply enough in terms of their validity, in terms of the scientific basis for them, or even more locally, does this work? Have we evaluated it? Do we really see a change from that? What would happen if we stopped it? They're the things that we should be doing. I always remember one of the easiest tests that I've ever seen, easiest experiments, was an organization that was curious about, of all of the hundreds of management reports that it opened, that it produced each month, and all of the effort that went into that. So one month they sent them all out password protected, and they said, "Please contact us for the password." And then they simply stopped producing the reports when nobody had asked them for the password. That's how you kill elephant dust in an easy form. It gets more complicated when people make assumptions around the link between activity and performance in a different way. And that's where we have space to play about, I hope, and try things. So stop doing some things. When you're shaping your organization, stop doing some things. And if there's no damage done, or things are even better, then think about what you might want to layer in, how you use that time. So be more evidence-based, commit to a rounded evaluation of what you do and why. And it doesn't take much time to be more evidence-based. It doesn't take much time to actually, before you start a year-long project or initiative or make a significant change in a business, to spend a few hours or even half an hour going, what do we really know about this? Is it that someone's just read it in a book as a paragraph? Seems like a good thing. Are we doing it because Google did it? And if we're doing it because Google did it, is that because we want to be a giant search engine? If not, why are we doing it and will it work here? And if you can do that and step back, then a whole world opens up. And if you've got more space, then the ability to say, actually, someone is doing an interesting thing, let's just pilot that, becomes more possible rather than a large-scale commitment. Because initiatives kill HR teams. When you have the same challenges year on year on year and year, and you're not fixing those challenges, then you know that you need to take a more evidence-based, science-based approach and say, not what could we do that might help this problem, but what are all the things that we need to do systemically to fix this problem? And a great example would be the lack of progress organizations have made when it comes to race in the workplace. Because lots of organizations have initiatives. Lots of organizations have things that they could list in their annual report. The number of organizations that have genuinely made progress is low. And that's because we don't take a genuine, systemic, joined up effort that's evidence-based. We base the work on what we heard someone else is doing that seems to make sense, or an anecdote. More evidence-based is the future of HR. That's great because you've got a whole day of evidence coming your way, so that fits really nicely. But we need to be challenging ourselves on what we do and how. The second thing that I'll kind of describe are kind of those three principles is being more outcomes driven. And the best example I can think of that is the description given by Dan Earley in Predictably Irrational, and he does a wonderful free MOOC as well. But he talks about locksmiths. I call it locksmith paradox. So if you've ever been locked out of your house, if you get an experienced locksmith, it's like magic when they turn up. They just kind of waft at the door with some tools and it comes open. If you get an inexperienced locksmith, it can quite often take longer to get in. It can they can damage the door frame if they're not experienced, and so it's taking you longer to get in, and you've got greater potential costs. But what Dan points out is that quite often we resent paying the person who just spent least amount of time there. So the person who turns up and opens your door with no fuss and then asks you to pay them, that seems unfair in some ways. The person who you can see they're putting in blood, sweat and tears to try and get the door open, and they're trying their level best, and it takes them a significant amount of time. Well, yes, obviously you want to pay them. And that's because we pay for, all too often, effort rather than expertise, or effort rather than actual output. Because if I asked you to set KPIs for a situation where you're locked out of your house, you want someone to come along and get you back in as quickly as possible and not damage your door. That's pretty much it. But human nature, and this is where we're irrational, this is where we're unreasonable, this is why it helps to understand behavioral economics. Human nature tells us that we don't weigh those things up in the way that you would do in the cold light of day. We weigh it in a very different way, in a very human way. And we do the same in the workplace. We reward people for effort. We talk about people's work ethic. We don't talk about, actually, they just found a really cute way of getting it done, and then they kick back for the rest of the day. There's a lovely quote from Bill Gates, a lovely, lovely quote where he says, if I've got anything remotely difficult to do, I will give it to the laziest person I know, because they'll find the easiest way to do it. And now, of all times in our economic lives, this is the time that you want lazy people. And I realize that's counter to everything that we normally say about work ethic and commitment and dedication and discretionary effort in organizations. How do we get more? What if we didn't want more discretionary effort in terms of time, but we wanted more people thinking smartly about the work that we do and finding shortcuts, or being inventive, or being creative, or going, I don't want to do that task in that way because that'll take me forever. Here's a quick way I can get 80% of it done in 20% of the time. Organizations full of those people, they're good, exciting organizations to be in. Not with people cutting corners the whole time, but with people being creative and focused on the task at hand and ways of delivering. And whilst we still keep rewarding people for being in the office late at night, although probably not at the moment in many cases, but whilst we have that as a mindset, how committed are you in terms of time, not what is your outcome, we will continue to get our understanding of talent. And then the final thing that I wanted to talk to you about before some book recommendations and hopefully some questions was about the challenge of disaster. And it seems odd in the middle of a disaster as depressing as the one that we're in now, with a well-being crisis happening around us, to talk about something as sad as that. But it's a case study in terms of principles and ethics and commitment to understanding what's right and what isn't. And it's a case study in voice in organization, but it's also a case study in humanity. So for those of you who don't know, I'll assume everyone knows about the Challenger disaster. Shuttle launched, explodes very shortly after launch, everyone on board killed. But the NASA website has a wonderful post-mortem of the events that took place. And there's a key meeting the day before where the engineers are explaining that whilst they haven't tested the shuttle at the temperature we'll launch at, they've tested it towards that range and parts fail. And the management team would like it to launch, and they are very overt in saying that because there's an absence of data at that point, we're not going to assume that there's going to be a problem. And it's the equivalent, on reflection, of saying, I've burnt my hand at 100 degrees plunging into boiling water, but I've never tried that at 105 degrees. You know that it tends to be too warm, and it's going to be even warmer. It's definitely going to be dangerous, but they wanted to launch. And there's a chilling moment in the meeting, a classic OD case study, where someone turns to the head engineer and says, I need you to take off your engineering hat and put on your management hat. Essentially, you need to shift from your expertise to the organizational response that it wants. And in the NASA summary, you can go back and you can listen to some of the engineers describing their experience. And one of them goes home to their wife that night, and they walk in the door, and their wife asks how they are and how their day's been, and they don't reply. And then their wife asks them again, and she says, how was your day? And he replies, oh, it's fine. We made a decision today that's going to kill everyone on that shuttle tomorrow, but apart from that, it was okay. That's how certain the engineers were that calamity was going to happen. And there's a chilling recounting of a period where the shuttle's just launched, but it hasn't exploded yet, where they are praying that all of their expertise that they've gained in their lives is wrong. To go back to that point around evidence-based, that they want to be wrong in this case. They want their expectation to be flawed. And it takes a little longer for the shuttle to explode than they thought. And they think there's a moment where they get away with it. And that haunts these engineers for the rest of their lives. Should they have spoken up more? Should they have done more? Should they have moved outside the boundaries of what we'd normally consider reasonable within a working environment and done something more dramatic? And people have to live with those decisions forever. Now, our work in HR quite often isn't life or death. At the moment, actually, in terms of potential risk to people, we are starting to deal with some of those decisions. But for most of you, it won't be life or death each day. But that concept of voice, that concept of expertise, and a willingness to listen to science, even when it's not what we want to hear, or is counter to what we would want to hear, that's to a degree at the heart of HR. And whilst we may not make life or death decisions every day, we make decisions every day that impact people's quality of life. And that matters as much. So throughout your career, you have a choice around what you do and how. And we're entering a period, to come back to that notion of the future of work, where the future of work is unclear. It is fundamentally unclear, but you can shape what's in front of you. You can be part of communities that exert pressure for things to be better. And that gives us the best possible chance of whatever comes out of this being a more healthy, positive state than we've come into it. There will be a time of turmoil that is inevitable, but what comes out of that on the far side, we have to hope that that's going to be better, but hope only gets you so far. We can have faith it's going to get better, but faith only gets you so far and can be misplaced. But what we can do is we can put time and activity and expertise and put the will of a community into improving things and support each other to be better. And if we can do that, then out of a really tragic time, we have a potential for a better world of work. But the speeches that you'll get for the rest of today, the sessions you'll get for the rest of today, that evidence base, that focus on what do we really know here, what the limitations of what we know and what can we do with it, that has to be at the heart of the profession going forward. So I'm happy to take questions. I think I've finished possibly an entire minute early, which is unprecedented. And if you're bored of the word unprecedented, that's one more use of it, but more than happy to take questions.
What excellent talk, David. Much appreciated. This different format is much needed sometimes. And many reflections should be faced for all of us about the future of work, because it's clearly unclear, and probably there aren't magic solutions to implement or to guess how the future of work is going to be. I took many notes. I took many notes about your talk, but I want to ask you or to deliver you some questions from the audience. The first is by Ajiz. David, you talked about evidence-based, principles-led, and outcome-driven. What's your take on purpose-based?
I think there's a growing focus on purpose-based organizations, certainly in the investment community. There's more of a focus on that as well. It's a brilliant way of getting people on side with a mission, with a sense of commitment, with a kind of North Star that they can focus around. I guess the challenge is, as with anything good, it rapidly gets hijacked. So you're starting to see organizations that clearly aren't for social good talking about transforming things that probably don't need them, whether it's, luggage or something like that. Our purpose is to do, can dress up all manner of ills. So I think there are some organizations, and I'm a huge supporter of them, that are genuinely thinking in a mature way about the way that they think about the world and their influence on them. There are some organizations that see a marketing opportunity. The first one, fully in favor of. The second one, highly skeptical.
Brilliant. The next question is by John Baldino. Systemic fixes are necessary and take big work. What evidence-based metrics would you recommend to have other leaders in the organization jump on board?
So I think the easiest thing to do is to pick the business metric that you are genuinely trying to fix. So too often we focus on HR metrics. So I remember speaking to someone at the Dutch Post Office a few years ago, and they were doing some great evidence-based work, and they had worked out the link between their engagement metric and absence in the organization. But they were talking to the business leaders and going, look, you need to be excited about engagement. And they got nowhere for years. And eventually they went back slightly more humble and they went, what would it be really useful for us to help you with? And their leaders said, well, if a post office worker's off, we need someone else to do the route, and that's really hard to train someone up to do, really disruptive. So bringing down absence would be great. So approaching it from the business side of the problem, suddenly instead of trying to sell in, they were consulting and supporting with. So the work that they couldn't get done before was suddenly the solution that was needed. So I think that the way to do it is to approach it from the business end, not try and get the organization to do it. A similar one, and it plays well into the wellbeing agenda currently. I spoke to someone, they said, I can't get my senior team excited about wellbeing because they're too worried about burnout. I was like, well, just call it burnout then. Just call it burnout and square that off. But I think too often we're worried about getting good HR practice done. We should be worried about getting good people practice done in organizations to support their goals.
Absolutely. One more question. Do you find that companies are increasingly focused on the social return on investment? Are there specific industries you have viewed as doing it right? By Matthew Rosenfeld.
It's quite interesting. So we speak to institutional investors quite often, and yes, there is far more of a focus on that than there has been historically. I think some of the industries that are making progress are the ones that have historically had the biggest problems in those spaces. So if you look at social impact or sustainability challenges in oil and gas, they've made some great progress there. I think the challenge that we all face, and it's inside organizations and outside, people practices and broader practices, are in a global recession, will organizations still hold true to those principles and ways of working, or will they reframe and become more driven by the bottom line, either out of necessity or because what they were doing before was just window dressing?
Cool. David, I have some notes. You were talking about humanity and how to be more humanistic. This is something that I'm pretty interested in, how to transform organizations in more humanistic organizations. Now that many people are working from home and working remotely, what is your reflection about that? How to transform organizations in more humanistic? Is there a critical key factor to get that in your point of view?
I think if I had one tip, because it's obviously, it would be another session in itself, and I'm sure you've got similar coming up, but my one tip would just be about language. So the more we make our language remote in the workplace from the way that we talk as human beings normally, the harder it is for the social connection and the humanity to come to the fore. So whilst we talk about terminations when it's someone losing their job, whilst we talk about efficiencies when it's someone losing their job, you are automatically dehumanizing the organization. I spoke to someone a couple of years back, and they said, it was actually around technology usage, and they said, we've identified 2,000 efficiencies. And I said, well, those efficiencies have plans for Christmas. When you call them efficiencies, you create an emotional distance. And actually, as HR professionals, we need to stay close to that human element. Doesn't mean we don't need to make difficult decisions, but there's a human burden to that, in the same way there should be, not just I ran a career program, but I really helped some people make a difference to their lives and the quality of their lives and their working lives. So there's an upside and a downside to it. But if we want to be more human, just speak like human beings, be disappointed, be happy, be upset, be all of the things that you can be as a human being. But it goes back to that complexity around authenticity in the workplace. There are some things that people authentically are that I don't want anywhere near somewhere I'm working. But the best bits of people, try and get them in.
Yes, absolutely agree with you, David. One of the things that you have commented is about productivity, performance. Probably we should, or organizations should redefine the concept of productivity. And you were talking about networks, about generating the capability to be more creative. Many times it's not about the presence in your office or in your position. It's about your value, or the value that you can add to the organization. What do you think about that? Because I think this deserves to be more explained.
Yeah, I think one of the things that we're really bad at, just in organizations as a whole, because it's really hard to solve for, is you look at someone's work over the course of a year and you might assess the quality of that in terms of their output. But what if every meeting they're in, there's a greater chance of there being a sensible decision? What if every time they've interacted with a colleague, that colleague feels better about their day and goes with a zip about their work? And we know that you have people like that, but quite often you wouldn't be able to define it within a traditional job role. Why are they excellent? Well, competency isn't often meetings are better with them in, but that's invaluable to have in an organization, because you only need 5 decisions to go a different way for the commercials to be very different. And likewise, we've all worked with people that their output is technically correct, technically good, the work they drive is great, and everyone else is worse off for them being in the organization. And until we start facing into that and measuring that, and it's really hard to, or in the absence of a measure, using proxy measures but taking it seriously, will continue to fundamentally undervalue that network effect within organizations.
Yeah. David, I love one thought that our audience wrote by David Kitchen. I love this. We are focused too much on HR problems, HR issues, and not on people issues or people problems. Wow, this is probably one of the most challenging situations that HR will have to face, no? And learning the traditional stuff.
Yeah, I mean, I speak to HR teams and they're still delighted because they've made lots of you say, what have you achieved this year? They've reinvented the performance management process. They've introduced a new process over here. They've done a leadership program, but we don't deal with the substance quite often. So, I've known genuinely leadership programs, top talent programs, senior programs be introduced just because the finance director is horrible. Right, you're not going to fix your problem with the finance director being horrible by everyone going on offsite. That's not the way the world works. But we do it as a proxy for it, because we don't. To go back to that point about language, we don't get to the heart of the issue. We don't just go, look, the problem isn't the group dynamics here. The problem is Gary. No one wants to work with Gary. No offense to anyone called Gary on this kind of event, but yeah, if we need to get back to what is the actual business problem here, remove the trappings from it, what's at the core of it, and then how do we solve for that? And not through, I heard another company's doing this, I heard another company's doing that, but just nuanced thinking that brings in a degree of evidence to go, this is probably our best chance of solving that problem. And it is far more time efficient. People don't do evidence-based HR because they think it takes time. Add up all of the time that your failed initiatives in your organization have taken. That's what cost looks like. Far better to have a coordinated systemic approach and fix something properly first time, or have a high percentage chance of that, than just keep investing 30 grand, 50 grand in leadership, environment every year.
Thank you. David, it's the time. What a wonderful talk. Thank you very much for being here with us. I can't thank you enough. Much appreciated. Hope we can talk soon about this future of work, the working from home, these hot topics just right now. It was a pleasure. I think our audience enjoyed a lot your talk. And thank you very much, David.
Lovely. Have a great time. Bye-bye.